Are you interested in competitive programming? I'm looking at you. I know you are. I know you are. I know you are. If so, you've come to the right place. Today we're going to be going over one problem that I think is a barrier to entry per se for like competitive programming. It tests basic I/O, basic logic, and it tests your ability to like pseudocode and to go through like the motions that most competitive programmers will eventually have to go through someday. So yeah, we're going to be going over the problem. I'll share solutions in the description, as well as um, solutions inside the video itself. I'd recommend before you look at the solution to try it out on your own. I'd highly recommend if you are stuck though, to watch like 10-second increments of kind of like my thought process, so that like you can kind of get unstuck without like fully revealing the solution. You still learn a lot from it. So yeah, don't cheat. You're only cheating yourself if you cheat. But yeah, without further ado, let's get started. So what you guys will want to do is you're gonna head over to A2OJ, A2OJ's ladders. I'll leave a link in the description. But essentially, from there, you're going to go and put in your Codeforces username. So, what your Codeforces username is, this it's just the username you selected. But if you're asking what is Codeforces in general, Codeforces is just like a repository and a community of people that are trying to make problems and solve problems related to competitive programming. There are contests, there are multiple, there's a plethora of resources for you to use. And I honestly think it's the best website for you to use starting out, or if you're an advanced competitive programmer. But most likely, if you're watching this video, you're like pretty new. Okay, so the first thing you want to do, if you're a new user or a new competitive programmer, is to head on over to Codeforces. If you go to the homepage, you'll see something like this. And if you don't have an account yet, you first need to make an account. So this is just my account, for example, but there should be a login button. If you log out, if or if I log out, you'll be able to see it. But there should be a login button right here. Use whatever name and password you like, but we're gonna be copy pasting that username over into A2OJ. You should see something up or a pop-up like this. You're gonna enter your Codeforces username. For me, that's Combat Pompano 81. And then let it load for a bit, and you'll be able to. Oh, did I? Okay, wait. Combat Pompano. Okay, yeah. So, if you go into a ladder and you've completed some problems from Codeforces before, you'll be able to see like your completions, which is kind of cool. You kind of get to see like which problems you still have to do, which ones you're like in the process of doing, right? So yeah, today we're gonna be looking at one of I think like this is fairly simple in terms of like what's there on Codeforces, but it's a very good problem, and it's young physicists. So we're gonna go to ladder. We're gonna go to the first ladder, which is ID 11, and we're gonna click on the first one, which is young physicist. So once you there, a new tab will open up, and you'll see the problem page. It says it has like the title of it, and it's young physicist. Now, for most problems on Codeforces, if you haven't used the platform, you will definitely get a synopsis like this. Now, there are like a few ways to tackle this. If you are to like use AI, you can use AI, but just be warned that during contests and such, you're not allowed to use AI to summarize problems, as it runs the risk of other abuses, but or other like other infractions, and like it's just not a good thing to do. It's a bad habit. But what I'd recommend you to do is to just like highlight or like passively highlight keywords. So if we look at the problem, it says a guy named Vasya attends the final grade of high school. We don't really need to worry about that. We don't really need to worry about any of the physics stuff, right? Um, or maybe we should. We don't really need to worry about the hockey team stuff. Physics, maybe. We'll keep that in mind. Specifically, he forgot to complete his physics tasks. Next day, okay, we don't need to worry about this. He gave the lazy student a seemingly easy task. Okay, this is when you kind of see this sentence, you or should be alerted that the problem statement is going to come up now. So you are given an idle body in space and the forces that affect it. So idle body is something at rest, and the forces that affect it. The body can be considered as a material point with coordinates 0, 0, 0. Vasya had only to answer whether it is in equilibrium. So that's the problem statement. Piece of cake, thought Vasya. Okay, we need to only check if the sum of all vectors is equal to 0. So Vasya began to say, all right, later it turned out that there can be, okay. So essentially what we need to do is write a program that takes some 3D object, right? Or something that can be manipulated with forces in three dimensions, right? And we have to check if it's in equilibrium after or not. So yeah, let's start. Now we also need to check the input and output. So we need to follow and adhere to the way the problem will give us input and then how it expects us to output the answer. So the first line contains a positive integer n. Then follow n lines containing 3 integers each: the xi coordinate, the yi coordinate, and the zi coordinate of the force vector applied to the body with these kind of constraints. We don't really need to worry about this in these types of problems, but these constraints get really, really important once we go later on into other problems, because bigger numbers usually can time out your code, but we don't really need to worry about that right now because it's just 100 each. But yeah, the output, print the word yes if the body is in equilibrium, otherwise the word no if it is not. So simple enough, right? So let's open up. Okay, so let's get started with the problem. I'm using VS Code to do this, but you can use any editor, whether that be like, what are some common editors, like Visual Studio, or something else. It doesn't really matter what you use as long as you know how to use it. But yeah, in VS Code, there's like a feature called snippets where you can like kind of auto-complete code like this. This is essentially like the skeleton code needed to run a program in C++, which is, in my opinion, very handy. I honestly don't want to like write this down or type this out every time I want to make a program. So yeah, it kind of does the overhead for me, and that's why I like Visual Studio Code. But yeah, you don't need to use it whatsoever if you don't want to. So yeah, let's start with the problem. You should have the problem statement open on Codeforces. But yeah, we've already went over the problem. I think, yeah, we've already went over the problem. So I'm just going to cut to me solving it now. So yeah. So the first thing we want to do is we want to input the amount of lines of xi, yi, and zi. So in order to do that, we're just going to set a variable n, and we're going to input n. In C++, this is what that looks like. And then we're going to do something that, at least this is like my personal choice for how to solve this problem, but we need to set summations for each component of forces. So if you look back at the problem here, you see that we need to solve for equilibrium. If you have taken physics before, or if you just Google search it, you need to take the sum of all forces in a specific component to see if it's in equilibrium at that component. If it's in equilibrium, or if the body is like in complete equilibrium, it's in equilibrium in all three dimensions you're working with, or in all dimensions that you're working with in general. So yeah, that's why we're going to use the summation. If you find some other way to do this problem, you can do this problem in that way, but I think this is the most straightforward. So yeah, we're going to set all of these equal to 0. This is important. Don't make sure you do this. And I'll explain why at the end of the video. But yeah, you need to set all of these equal to 0. It's very important that you do this. Okay, so now we have the amount of lines and we have our summation variables. So now what we're going to do is iterate over each line, over each line's contents, and we're going to input those contents into our code. So we're going to do I is less than n, I plus plus. Another way to do this is to set I equals 1 and then I is less than or equal to n. This also works, but usually it's kind of common to leave out a less than or equal to and just write it like this. This works as well if we want to iterate from 1 to n, or from the first thing to the last thing. So yeah. Now what we're going to do is set temporary variables. So a temporary variable is just a variable that you're not going to use like for a prolonged period of time, or its value is going to reset. And in this case, its value is going to reset every time we iterate over this for loop. So we're going to set temporary variables for the values inside of each line. So that'll be x, int y, int z. These are our line values of x, y, and z. And now we're going to input. We're going to get those values from our input. And that's how you do it in C++. There's also like other ways to do this, but this is kind of like the most straightforward way of doing it, just like separating it by line. You don't need to do this. There's also a way in which you can do this by just removing all the CNs like this. That's also another way of doing it, but for the purposes of this video, this is fine. And now what we're going to do is simply just add the value of x that we have in this specific iteration onto our summation values. So we're going to do sum x. Make sure that you're adding x to the summation of x. This is important. Make sure you're not like swapping variables. Like if a designated variable, or like you want to match the variables. So x goes with x, y goes with y, z goes with z, and we're going to do just that. The additive operator is going to add the value automatically without us doing sum x equals sum x plus x. You can do that, but this is just easier to write, and a lot of people know what it is. So, and we're going to do the same thing for all the other ones. Sum z. Okay, and yeah, that's essentially it for our for loop. And now the main part of the problem is coming up. What we want to do now is check whether or not this is an equilibrium, or the object given is in equilibrium. In order to do this, we need to check if all components are 0. If they are, then yes, our body is in equilibrium. So if sum x equals 0, and we use the and operator in C++ to assign another condition. And then sum y also has to be equal to 0. And don't forget, sum z also needs to be 0 since this is a 3D problem. If all of those conditions are true, if one of these conditions are false, we're going to get an error, right? So we need to make sure that all three of these conditions are true. Then we print yes, or output yes. If not, if any of those conditions are false, or if all those conditions are false, we output no. And let's just check if we've adhered to the output. Yeah, we've done exactly that. So now let's test our code. Or actually, I kind of want to show you guys why it's important to set values to your variables in C++. Suppose we were to do this. Now the reason why this doesn't work is because if you don't initialize your variables, you will get garbage values assigned to these. And once you try and add to garbage values, you're not adding to anything. So these will remain 0, and you're going to get false positives when you're trying to output yes or no. So, yeah, false positives and code just won't work. This is really important. So make sure that you are adhering, or not adhering, but make sure you're just being careful with what value your variables are at currently. For these ones, we don't really need garbage values because we haven't assigned anything to these yet. We are assigning them as we input their values from the line, if that makes sense. We don't need to assign these to x or we don't need to assign x equal to 1, because if we do that, it'll conflict with whatever we're inputting for x. But here, we're not changing the sum like with an input, so we need to we're adding on to it actually. So we need to set it to a concrete value, like 0. So yeah, that's essentially it. I'm going to add the semicolon there. I forgot about that. And yeah, we're going to build our code, check if it works. Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to our Code Forces tab. We're going to copy the input. And if you're on VS Code, or I think any code editor, this should pop up when you're trying to like compile something with a terminal. But yeah, it asks you, are you sure you want to paste 5 lines of text into the terminal? And you want to say paste. You do not want to say paste as 1 line. You want to say paste. And this should return no, which it does. And yeah, it does return no, so that works. And then we're going to try the second line, or second input, and see if our code works. And we're going to paste. Okay, so once we've built, we're going to try the second input. Sorry, wrong tab. We're going to copy the input. Make sure you've built, by the way. It's very important. Like on VS Code, for me, it's Command-Shift-B or Control-Shift-B. You need a compiler for it, obviously. But yeah, it should work once you compile. If you've made an error in your previous code and you don't recompile, no matter how many times you save it, it's not going to work, because whenever you use like the /1 command in terminal, or whenever you're in a folder /1, or with a file name of 1, and you use this command, it's just not going to work, because this runs the machine code, the compiled code of the program. It doesn't detect saves in the C++ file. So yeah, make sure to recompile. But yeah, we're gonna test the second input, and this should work. Yes, and we got yes. If we are to submit our solution, if we want to submit a solution for this problem, we would want to go into our files and choose the file that we wanted or worked on. We're going to choose the C++ file. We're not going to choose the machine code file. We're going to choose the C++ file, and we're going to hit submit. We're also going to verify the language. If you're in most cases, if you're using C++, in most cases, if you're using C++, you want to stick to GNU G++17. There's not really a difference between these, except that if you're using G++23, you're going to gain C++23 features. Same thing for C++ or G++20. GCC is for C, not C++. C Sharp, all these other ones, they're for different languages. So you can use whatever works for you. I do my own research on which one to use before using them. But for C++ users, GNU G++17 should work for most of your problems. But yeah, we're going to submit. And once we submit, oh, sorry, we need to go through the verification. So I'm just going to do this again. Open. And we're going to submit that. You're going to be put onto this screen. You're going to see the verdict page. And essentially what this is going to do is it's going to run your code through a lot of test cases. You can see like for a few of these, I got like a wrong answer on test 7. That's something you're going to see. On some occasions, if your code is not or is buggy, you're going to see a compiler error, or a compilation error in particular. So that's something you need to look out for. But yeah, Codeforces doesn't like take off points if you get a wrong answer. You just simply refactor your code and you try again. Another thing to note is your time and your memory. For problems like these, you really don't need to worry about time or memory at the moment. But as you go along in your studies and your practice of competitive programming, you want to make sure that you're using as little time and as little memory as possible, because things often get weird once you get to a certain threshold of time or memory. In particular, time, if your solution takes too much time, and in C++ you're given like around 4 seconds, your the verdict bot or verdict software is going to time you out, meaning that you're going to get a timeout thing or message in your verdict, and then you have to refactor your code. And usually that's a bug, or sorry, not a bug. That's something that you typically want to avoid. But for now, for these problems, you really don't need to worry about them. I've never gotten a time error because I'm relatively new to competitive programming still. So yeah, I've never gotten to a point where I have to refactor my code very heavily for these things. But as I go along and as you come along on this journey of competitive programming, you'll maybe encounter something like that. So it's something to keep in mind. But yeah, with that, if you go to A2OJ's ladder and you have your username put on there, when you refresh, you should see your first green highlighted problem, which, pat yourself on the back. I mean, it's an accomplishment. But yeah, good job on this problem. It's definitely not easy. It's definitely not something to kind of take for granted. But I hope that on this kind of journey, you learned something, and I hope you continue on the path to becoming a good competitive programmer. I'll actually leave you guys on one little tidbit about competitive programming, and that's the rank system. So in terms of competitive programming, if you want to advance, quote unquote, if you want to advance in the world of competitive programming, there are ranks that you want to go through. And these ranks are only given to you by entering contests on Codeforces. So I'll actually come back to screen share. So here it's I'm currently unrated because I haven't unfortunately been given the chance to get into a competition live just due to timing. But if you go home, you'll see all these rounds. This is like usually the first thing you see when you open Codeforces. And yeah, this is where you're going to sign up for things, or actually this is particularly the place where you're going to sign up, but you can see information for all of these competitions over here. Now, a few things you want to note. Whenever you see things like Division 4 is usually your lowest bracket of competitors. These are people within the ratings of 1,000 ELO to 0, or maybe around 1,500 max. Division 3 is around 2,000 to 1,500, or 2,000 to 1,000, depending on how the competition sorts it out. Division 2 is 2,000 to 3,000, and Division 1 is around. Division 1 and Division 2 usually kind of merge together in terms of ranking. There's usually not too many Division 1 rounds. Like you can see here, I scrolled like a few times. I could only see, let's see. This one is actually for Division 1 Grandmasters. But yeah, you usually see Division 3 or Division 2 rounds. Division 4 and Division 1 are pretty uncommon. But yeah, you're usually given an awarded ELO, or ELO is taken away from you based on your performances on a competition. Everyone starts at 0 ELO. And if you go here, we can check people who are at the top of the leaderboards, like Tourist, for example, who has registered 16 years ago and got a maximum of 4,000 ELO, which is crazy. But all of these dots you see are kind of entries into competitions. And here you can see like plus 48, plus 13, plus 51, minus 4. And these are just all of his tournament experience. He started from 1,600 and climbed all the way up. So yeah, I'm not even at a point where I'm rated, which is kind of crazy to think about, and I'm here teaching you, which goes to show how deep competitive programming really is. So don't get discouraged if you try problems on the A2OJ ladders, you can see here there's tons and tons of problems. Don't be discouraged if you find yourself getting on like a roadblock or anything like that. I'd usually recommend you brush up on your fundamentals, read an editorial if you want to find editorials for problems. You can see them here. I'll actually show them to you right now. Let me go to submissions. Let's go Young Physicist. And you can see an editorial here on the very bottom next to the submit page saying tutorial. This will open up a new link, and yeah, you'll see you won't, for some problems, if it's very simple, or depending on the editorial type, or like the people making the editorial, some will give you the code in the editorial, which I would highly recommend you not to copy paste. This is very, very important. Don't copy paste it. I'd recommend, however, you just go through each part of the editorial one at a time and check for each, or like just go through it step by step and see where you need until you're unstuck.